And the Ospreys call us to order here at McDuff Lives. It's Monday night, and it's Monday night with Garland
Uh-oh.
Nixon. I always enjoy our Monday night conversations. And let's see, we're adjusting a little camera there, but
Yep,
I
I
think
think
we're
I'm
ready
good.
to go. Garland, are you with us?
Yeah, and if we have a bad signal, if things go bad, I've been having little signal problems, it seems like tonight. I can take about a minute and just run in the other room and hardline it. So if things start going bad, let me know, and we'll in a minute I'll plug into the hardline. So keep an eye out. Let me know if you're losing me, and we can fix it.
Okay, we're doing fine so far.
Okay.
Andy will let us know if. And we're very happy to have Andy DeBala running the board tonight, our great producer, and he's doing well. Uh, Thanks everyone for their thoughts and prayers for our good buddy Andy. Garland, what the heck is going on now? It looks like things are moving quickly over in Ukraine and Europe, and as a result of the G7 and these NATO meeting that happens. What have you been observing, and how? I mean, we've been very concerned about the possibility that Ukraine might become a member of NATO, and I'm seeing today reports that that's going to happen. Is that correct?
I don't believe it's going to happen. Let me tell you what has happened over the past, how we got here with Ukraine and why I don't think it's going to happen. Well, let's start with this. 2008, I believe it was, in Georgia, an area called South Ossetia, and it was a disputed area, and the people in that area, the Ukrainian, then I think was the prime minister, a guy named Saakashvili, who is very much a NATO kind of guy. And there was a disputed area with Russia. And so the guy Saakashvili felt as though that if he used military force on that area, that NATO would support him. And he tried to use military force. And of course, as we've discussed, I mean, Russia's military is a superpower military. Well, he tried to use force, and things didn't look so well for him. And he asked NATO to come in, and they said no. And he got crushed pretty quickly. And Ukraine was kind of headed for the same thing. They went down in that area. They're like, okay, we're going to take Crimea back and eastern Ukraine, and they put some troops on the ground in the area, and they were threatening. And the NATO and U.S. said, well, we support you. The Russians put about 100 to 150,000 troops in the area with a lot of military material and on their border, and they said we ain't going to let that happen. And the same thing when Zelensky looked at NATO and the U.S., they said, oh no, we not going to go in there. It's like, we'll put you up to it, but we ain't going to help. We're not going to help you. So Ukraine then basically said, well, we want to be members of NATO. Well, keep in mind, the Russians have said that's a red line. That is a red line. And if we think that Ukraine or Georgia on our border are becoming members of NATO, will take military action. So if you decide to make them a member of NATO, you're risking the likelihood of military action by the Russians on their border. Okay. So the Ukrainians basically have said to the U.S. and in NATO, we'd like to be members. And they basically, NATO and the U.S. have strung them out. They said things like, well, we'll put together a plan. Well, you know how bureaucrats do things. We'll put together a committee to talk about a committee Well, they kept basically giving the Ukraine this. So recently, the prime minister of Ukraine has said, we want a for sure yes. And basically all they're getting is strung out. So the bottom line is this: NATO is not going to risk military action by Russia on Russia's border by making Ukraine a member of NATO. In my opinion, it's not happening. And so the president of Ukraine is in a jam domestically. Domestically, he's in a jam because he put those forces on the border of Crimea and eastern Ukraine and claimed he was going to take them back. The Russians put their people on the border to stop him, and he had to back down. And now he has these, tens of thousands of troops that are basically sitting there in the field on the borders. They can't act, and he can't really call them back because of internal pressure. He could lose power. So he's in a jam. So the way he's trying to get out of it is to become a member of NATO. NATO and the US are not going to do it. In fact, it appears to me, to a large extent, Ukraine has lost its utility to NATO and the US. And you know how these people are. They'll get a puppet, they'll string that puppet along with, this puppet will think, oh yes, the NATO and the US is going to support and back us. And when they're done with that puppet, they will turn their back on you and leave you twisting in the wind. And that's where the Ukraine is. They're like, we want to be members of NATO, and the US and NATO are like, we'll give you a plan about a plan about a plan. No, tell me now, we must be members of NATO. And they're like, all you get is a plan and a little bit of money. Keep your mouth shut. So that's where Ukraine is. Nothing's happening with Ukraine. What is of consequence next is that I think I'd like to talk about a little bit is Biden and Putin are going to be meeting here very shortly. It appears to me there's three angles going on here. Here are the three angles going on, really. Angle one, that is, the US wants to go after China, and they want Russia to and Russia and China are allies, and they want Russia to kind of step aside so they can go after China. And Russia and China are allies. And that's angle one, which is not going to happen. Because the Russians basically feel like this: sure, you're going to set us aside so you can go after them and then pick us off later. Not going to happen. We weren't born yesterday. So Russia and China are allies. Now, meanwhile, looking at Biden, it appears that Biden wants to turn the volume down somewhat with Russia. He wants to turn it down somewhat. And I think, again, because they want to focus on China. But within, and this is the big important part of this whole conversation that I'll get to. Biden wants to turn the volume down some, but within the Biden administration and within the U.S. foreign policy realm, there's a super hawk. So now what we're dealing with in America is the war hawks and the super war hawks. There ain't much else in the U.S. government. So Biden's a war hawk, but he wants to turn the volume down a little bit. The super war hawks never want to turn the volume down on anything. So if you start looking at these articles, the super war hawks are out there getting articles. Biden must confront Putin. He must stand up to Putin for every false accusation that we've made over the last couple of years. You know, we've accused Putin of everything but stealing the Lindbergh baby, right? Every other day, the Russians stole my socks, hacked my iPhone, whatever. They stole article after article after article. And so they're pushing Biden. They're trying to throw a monkey wrench in the meeting so that Putin and Biden can't turn the volume down any. And I think with a lot of these people, they make so much money off of the enmity between Russia and China. So they don't want, their money bags to be shut down any. And I think that's where we are. That's where Ukraine, they're kind of out of the mix. Biden wants to turn the volume down. They want Russia to chill out so they can go after China, and Russia is not going to have it. What I think is going to happen is this. I'll end up by saying this. I believe the Russians are going to, the Russians understand what's going on. So I think the Russians are probably going to say, well, what you're saying is making a lot of sense. We're going to go back and meet with our people. We'll meet with you again in September. Oh, that makes a lot of sense too. We'll talk to you again. Basically, I think the Russians are just going to try to string them out as long as they can. As long as they string them out, nothing's happening, nothing gets accomplished, nothing else goes down. So I think the Russians are just going to string them out as long as they can. I think they understand the game here. That's my thoughts.
It reminds me, about 2 months ago, we were talking about the Nord Stream pipeline and considering how that deal was being blocked at the time. Now I understand it's gone through since then, and that the U.S. is no longer throwing up roadblocks to that deal, which must be huge for Russia to know that they've got a pipeline to Germany that will just provide a constant stream of cash in exchange for their natural resources. That may be connected to what's happened in the sense of, well, yeah, we're going to do business now instead of doing war with Russia. It seems like we always go through these cycles, right? Remember when Obama was at the beginning saying, hey, we can do business with these folks, but then it goes back and forth. And so the cycle now is, okay, we're going to let the Nord Stream pipeline happen. Some deals must have been made behind the scenes to allow that to happen. And that may be part of what you're saying, is that U.S. is romancing Russia so that they can have time to turn their attention to China without Russia interfering too much in the wake of getting their Nord Stream deal. I'm just speculating, but what do you think?
Well, a couple of things about Nord Stream. I'm glad you brought that up because that does play in the middle of this, but people need a little bit of history on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. A couple of things. The Russians have been for many, many years supplying about 1/3 of the gas for Northern Europe through various pipelines. The reason that this is called Nord Stream 2 is because there's a Nord Stream 1, right? So the argument that the Russians are somehow going to control the Germans if they're selling them gas through Nord Stream 2, well, they're already selling them gas and they ain't doing it. Might I add, how about this? The Germans bought gas through the Soviet Union when there was 7 or 20,000 tanks on the other side of the line. When both sides had nukes pointed at thousands of nukes pointed at each other every day, right? Germany was buying gas from them then, and it has never been interrupted. So if it hasn't been interrupted while they were both almost at war, it certainly ain't going to be interrupted now. And the other thing about it is this: the real issue with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline has nothing to do with it. First of all, here's what people have to know. The reason there's a Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the Russians didn't want to do it. Angela Merkel approached Putin and said, let's do this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And the Russians were like, we're okay the way it is. And they're like, oh, we want to do this. So the Russians reluctantly agreed with the Germans to do a Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Why? Because they can get the Germans wanted to do it because it makes sense. It's economics. They can get cheap gas from a neighbor that can reliably and inexpensively pay for them gas. They don't have to pay for these big LPG ships to transport it from all the way around the world. You get this pipeline, they turn the pipeline on, you get cheap prices. You know what I mean? It makes sense. You get cheap. Well, and might I add, one of the things that happened is after the big Japanese Fukushima mess, the Germans then decided we're going to shut down our nuclear stuff because that's just too dangerous. We're going to go in another direction. So they started doing more gas. Now, here's the real issue with the Nord Stream pipeline. Remember, the Germans are already buying gas for Russians, so nothing's going to change anything there, right? If the Russians didn't use it as a crutch before, why would they do it now? Okay, it's simple business. But here's the issue. The current pipeline runs through the Ukraine, and the Ukraine gets transit fees of 3 to 4 billion per year. Remember, the Ukraine is basically a colony of the United States. The United States runs as just a puppet government that we run. If that $3 to $4 billion for those transit fees stops coming to the Ukraine, they're going to look to the United States for that money because the United States is their patron. You see what I'm saying? So the U.S. was unhappy, like, darn, if they cut that off, we're going to have to, make it up some kind of way. And might I add, one of the reasons that the Russians kind of agreed was because at one point the Ukrainians weren't paying their gas bill. So the Russians cut them off. They're like, you ain't not until you pay your bill. You can't, because Ukraine's had a lot of economic problems. So they said, until you pay your bill, you can't get gas. The Ukrainians then siphoned gas off the pipeline from the Europeans illegally. And so the Europeans weren't happy. Now, they won't come out and say it, but I can imagine that may be one of the reasons that Angela Merkel said to the Russians, let's build this pipeline to go around these suckers. Because if they're siphoning off gas, the Europeans are paying for the gas. The Germans, the Austrians, the Norwegians, they're paying for the gas. The Ukrainians are burning part of it. So they all agreed, we're going to do this thing. And so now the Ukraine is angry because they lose the transit fees that Russia and Germany and Austria, et cetera, had to pay. Now, keep in mind, you've got German and Austrian companies who have billions involved in this. So that's why the German government, you got corporations in your government, in your country, who have billions of dollars invested, and they expect to make some money and get some return on their money, which is reasonable. So if you cut them off, there's going to be all kinds of lawsuits in Germany. The Russians are going to be, everybody, and your corporations, everybody's going to be suing the government of billions of dollars and billions that they lost. So it was a really mess for the German government, and the German government couldn't back down. I think what happened with the U.S. was this. I think The U.S. backed down because they were going to lose. Because the Germans had said, we're not backing out. I don't care what you do. We're going to build this pipeline. And I think the U.S. didn't want to say to the Germans, you better do it. And the Germans say, we're going to do it anyway. And then the U.S. loses. And what are you going to do? Are you going to sanction one of your closest allies, et cetera? So the U.S. was in a situation where they couldn't do it to protect Ukraine's transit fees, and they ended up backing out. But they didn't back down out of their own goodwill and good spirit. They backed down because they knew they were going to lose anyway, and the Germans wouldn't back down. So there's a lot to going on with there, which I might add one more into this, which is one of the things that shows that the U.S. has a lot of issues with its so-called allies right now, because the U.S. won't treat Germany and England, et cetera, with respect. England wanted to do Brexit. Now, I'm no Trump fan, but Trump said they want to do Brexit, they should do Brexit. And you know how I feel about sovereignty. And I ain't thrilled with the EU anyway. I think it's a neoliberal world, globalist mess that screwed over the people and enriched the banks and the richest people. So to me, as the kind of person I am, I'm in favor of Brexit. But whatever the case, the Brits voted for it. They should get it. And now Biden's hassling them and taking the side of the EU and back to that globalist crap. As I said, I don't agree with Trump on a lot of stuff, but I think he was right on that.
One aspect of the Ukraine that we haven't touched on is the Biden family investments there in Burisma. Is this lack, if they cut off or screw up their pass-through billions, they're $3 or $4 billion a year, is that affect Biden's deal? And remind us what was it that Biden and his family invested in, and was that not the energy company Burisma, and are those connected?
Well, I don't know now if they are. A couple of things, and it's interesting about that because for those who don't, I'll give you the one. For those who don't know about it, I'll give them the 1-minute version or 30-second version, and that is 2014. The U.S. government overthrows the government of Ukraine. They put, a lot of people don't know this, they put Joe Biden in charge of the company. It was not the country. It was not, a democracy. Joe Biden's running around saying this is democracies versus the autocracies and these autocrats. Joe Biden was an autocrat. He ruled the country of Ukraine, and it wasn't democratically ruled. He was an autocratic ruler of Ukraine. So, and his son then, so basically in February, the U.S. overthrows the government of Ukraine. Keep in mind something. 3 months earlier, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, had got thrown out of the Navy because he had a cocaine addiction problem. So he gets thrown out of the Navy. 3 months later, or 4 months later, whatever it is, the U.S. overthrows the government of Ukraine. His father's put in charge of the country. And he gets a job. He gets brought onto the board of a company called Burisma Holdings, which was a gas company that was under investigation. His father gets the attorney general of the country who was investigating this country. So this company is an investigation. Their assets are frozen in England. They're crooked as a rattlesnake. Joe Biden takes over the country. They put his son on the board. And he gets the investigation stopped, and he gets the investigator fired. He gets their attorney general fired and gets him replaced by a guy. Now, the guy that Joe Biden got had to replace the attorney general that was investigating his son's company. The Ukrainian government had to change the law because the guy wasn't a lawyer. Imagine that. Your attorney general ain't even a lawyer. But what he was good enough to do was drop that investigation against Joe Biden's son. So, and here's another interesting fact. The Ukrainian government has their state state gas company, in the same way the Russians have their state gas companies called Rosneft, et cetera. Okay, Gazprom, Rosneft. Well, the Ukrainians have a big state gas company also, right? It's not unusual in that part of the world. There's a guy named Amos Hochstein who did the same thing that Hunter Biden did. Amos Hochstein comes from the U.S., goes over there. Now he's on the board of their state. Immediately after we overthrow the company, he's on the board of the state gas company. Well, recently, Joe Biden digs this guy out of mothballs and assigns him to stop Nord Stream 2. The guy who, as you said, if he was involved in the company that's going to lose money, he's probably still got some stocks or something in there. So the whole thing was crooked from top to bottom. I got to add this about it, though. I believe that Joe Biden is somewhat compromised. Let me tell you why. His son was doing business in China, lots of business, billions of dollars in business in China. You ain't going to tell me the Chinese government doesn't know every dirty thing he did. Now, Joe Biden's son was involved in what appears to me to be criminality and unethical activity in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has said nothing goes on in Ukraine that we don't know about. It's on his border. Do you think anything that goes on in Canada that we don't know about? How about that? So I'm going to guarantee you, and Ukraine is like the crookedest country in the world. I will guarantee you this, that the Russians, any information they want, they can buy from, on the black market or from all of these crooked people. So I guarantee you that the FSB, the Russian intelligence, is all over Ukraine. And I will guarantee you that any dirt on Joe Biden and Burisma and anybody that did dirt in Ukraine, I will guarantee the Russians have every single bit of it. So I would argue and that the people who say that Joe Biden is most likely compromised in Ukraine, in Romania, in China, because his family was involved in so much criminality around the world, I guarantee Biden's compromised. Some people just say China because they don't like China. The Biden family would make crooked money anywhere in the world they would. I guarantee you he's compromised all over the place. And there are any number of people in those countries that could take Joe Biden down anytime they wanted to.
Well, wow, let's think about that. So he then is a paper tiger when he stands up and yells at, somebody, we are saber rattling, but he can't ever actually draw his sword, because if he does, then the people that have everything on him and his family will crush him.
Add one thing to this. And the FBI has that laptop from Hunter Biden, don't they? So if he goes awry of the intelligence community here, they can take him out. They had that laptop while the Ukraine gate was going on, and while they were trying to take Trump out with this false narrative of he was doing something illegal in Ukraine, which Trump was not. It was a false narrative. But at that time, the allegations were made against Trump. The FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop. They knew what Trump was accusing the Bidens of was true. If the FBI had been actually working for Trump, they would have said, well, you can't impeach him. Here's the laptop at gate. Here's the laptop information. So you got to drop the the impeachment. But the FBI didn't, of course, because the whole intel community was on it. But the bottom line is, I've argued all along, the FBI is holding onto that laptop, not for anything to do with Hunter Biden, but so anytime they say to Joe Biden, we think, if the intelligence community says to Joe Biden, we think you should do this, and Joe Biden says, no, I don't, they can say, well, isn't it funny what we found on this hard drive? We sure would hate for this to get leaked to the Washington Post, the New York Times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Joe Biden is, the thing about it is this: they spent all of this time telling us Trump is compromised by the Russians. Isn't it ironic that Joe Biden is compromised from the intelligence community, the Russians, Ukrainians, Chinese? I don't know who doesn't. Maybe the people in Iceland don't have some dirt on Joe Biden, but it seems to me that everybody else does.
During the election period, I was looking into all this stuff. Peter Schweitzer's book, Secret Empires, details a lot of the Biden family's relationships, not only in Ukraine, but of course in China and directly with the People's Republic of China's military. And that has got to be, I mean, how can anybody not be suspicious of what's going on in the world right now after what you just said? That certainly China has stuff on Biden, on his family, that they could use against him. And so once again, does that prove that all of this is just stirring up a lot of dust in order to justify more military budgets and paying more money to our military industrial complex? and not really. I mean, you got a lot of people in the world right now thinking we're on the brink of Armageddon because of the rhetoric that's going around. But if you consider that, like a, a chess piece that's been pinned by another chess piece, Biden can't move because he's pinned. I don't know where this takes us, except for that. Seems like China's in the driver's seat.
Well, and I think when it comes to Biden, really, there are a lot of people in the driver's seat with this guy. You know what I mean? And Biden seems to me, he's the kind of person that the globalists like having in power, because he's so compromised that you can twist him in any direction you want to. You know what I mean? So the guy, I mean, the thing about it is this. It appears to me that the Biden clan went around the world, and anywhere Hunter and the family could, anywhere in this world that they could use Joe Biden's name to make a dollar, they did it. They did it. So any country that has issues with the US for whatever, most likely they got, I mean, the major countries, most likely they got something on Hunter, because he was going around just basically what we're talking about is influence peddling. It's like a tiny, tiny fraction of a version of the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation, that was overt. Everybody could see that. That was influence peddling at the highest level. I think Hunter Biden, they were like the little amateur country boy bumpkin influence peddlers. They weren't as sophisticated as the Clintons, so they didn't have this gigantic machine like the Clinton Foundation that they went around getting hundreds of millions from the Saudi princes and stuff like that. They were more stumbling and bumbling, going around, knocking on doors. Joe Biden lands in China. His son gets off the plane and goes and shakes a deal with somebody, and, shakes hands and gets a deal with somebody. He lands in this country. He literally would have his son on the plane with him. His son would get off the plane and go do a business deal. Air Force Two, go do a business deal and get on it back on Air Force Two. So it was anywhere that they could get a dime. The Clintons did it, but it was a more sophisticated way in the way the Clintons did it. The Bidens were much more ham-handed, and you know what I mean, and clumsy about the way they did that. In a way, that's all you're looking at. The globalists are going to go around the world making money any way they can. The sophisticated globalists like the Clintons are going to be able to do it in a way that they start an NGO and it looks like they're doing good work or something. The unsophisticated globalists like the Biden are just going to stumble into any country they can, stick their hands out and say, put some money in my palm and we can talk.
And you can be the president too if you put enough money in enough people's hands. If the lesson is, you want to be the president, just grease a lot of palms and you can be the president. It's a disgusting thing to think of, but that's the sign of our times. Let's also remember that Biden, of course, is from Delaware, and Delaware is the corporate sweetheart corporate state of all 50. Also the home of one of the world's great weapons manufacturers, DuPont. And DuPont is probably the single major influence behind what Biden does. So if you make a deal with Biden, you're also basically making a deal with DuPont, because anything he does has got their approval too, and that is the military industrial complex that's behind the curtain in so many cases. And this business about going to war with China now, let's continue with China for a minute, if you would.
Certainly love to.
Do you think that's what we're doing? Are we getting ready to do something with China now, since we've got Russia set off to the side for a little while?
Okay. So what I think is this, I forgot who it was, but there was an international security analyst that was talking about U.S. foreign policy. They said if the U.S. was in a chess tournament, you could easily tell who they were. They'd be the ones who started off with bold, aggressive first moves and didn't have any plan after that. So when it comes to China, here's the way I see it. The US wants to be the world's hegemon. They want to run the world. They wake up one day and they look and there's another country. And as we've talked about in the past, how did China get powerful? Because the oligarchs in the US picked up all of the factories and moved them to China, and they got rich off of that, right? And so, basically China opened up a huge labor market where the people work for free, work for cheap, and the oligarchs' eyes got big. Holy moly, we can close we don't have to pay Americans a decent salary anymore. We'll just move. And so they moved to China, and the US woke up one day and China was getting really, really rich and passing us. Why? We had an industrialized economy. We got rid of industry, and now it's a financialized economy where all the money is made through complex financial transactions, and the bankers and the oligarchs get all the money, and the rest of us just get screwed. So when the US realized China's passing us, now they panicked. Oh my God, what do we do? China's passing us. So since we don't have any diplomatic, really, the US doesn't use diplomacy anymore. Diplomacy is a thing of the past. They didn't know what to do. They said, well, we got a big military. We'll send some ships to just like go over near China. So they send these ships. Well, what the hell really good is that going to do? So now here's the problem, I think. The military contractors have realized there's a lot of money in threatening China. So the military contractors see all this money. They're like, yeah, China's scary. We need to build more missiles. So they get a contract for more missiles. Well, we need some more ships because of China. They get more ships. And now it's building on itself. China is now an excuse for the military industrial complex to get rich, to make money, to just keep saying China's out there and they're scary. We need more ships. We need more bombs. We need more missiles. We need this because China's scary. So now they got an excuse to get rich, right? The globalists can now get rich through that. But keep in mind something. The bankers now are doing, Goldman Sachs is over there. The bankers are over there selling credit cards. They're making money. You go to Walmart, everything comes from China. You go to your stores, everything comes from China. If you think about it. If the US were to go to war with China, it would be the collapse of us overnight. Nike would be gone. Name a company, the major company in the United States that doesn't get all of their stuff from Canada. In the bottom line, we go to war with Canada tomorrow. Can we build any automotive? The automotive industry shuts down. They can't get parts. They can't get chips. They get anything. So we can't build vehicles. All of our computer industry shuts down. They can't get anything. Cell phone industry, well, we can't get parts. We know cell phones. How about televisions? Not going to happen. How about everything on Walmart? In Walmart, empty Walmart closes down. And go after, keep their Target, name store after store after store. All the big stores close down. What about Amazon? What percentage of Amazon's products are made in China? 70 maybe? Higher? They shut down. So in reality, to go to war with China overnight would end our economy. It's over. We got no business. They'd be screwed, but we would too. So the reality is, in my opinion, the corporate oligarchs, I do not believe that they are willing to give up all of their money by giving up their free labor tomorrow. So what the US wants to do is menace China, is threaten them. And they're like, well, if we keep threatening them, then they'll back down or they'll do something. But I don't think we really have a long-term plan for China. There is no long-term plan. We're doing everything wrong. We're globalists. We're screwing everything over. We won't put any money in our own. It's like having a house and you won't ever fix the floors or redo the bathrooms or paint a wall. We will do no infrastructure. So our infrastructure is falling apart and they're putting trillions of dollars in their infrastructure. We won't do research and development. They're doing it. We're doing everything wrong. And not just China. Other countries are in the passing lane going around us. China just happens to be the big one, and it's globalism. Because basically our globalist oligarchs make money as rentier. The bottom line is they're sucking all of the money out of the average working class person. They're like parasites, and now they're trying to, blame China or say we have to do something right. It's just, this is what globalism does. It rots your country from the inside out. We're looking for somebody to blame. It's Russia, it's China, it's Iran, it's Venezuela. It's neoliberalism or globalism, whatever you want to call it, that's wiping our country out. While the British were smart enough the British people were smart enough to vote for Brexit and say, I want out of this globalist crap. They're still run by a bunch of globalists who are still doing the same, who are still doing the same thing. The British people were wise enough, in my opinion, to say, hey, we don't control our borders. We don't control our money. We don't control anything. No, we want our country back. That's what I think, in my opinion. And they voted for Brexit, in my opinion, rightly so. Let's not forget, the globalists told the UK, if you guys leave the European Union, your country will fall apart overnight. Remember how they were talking about the total destruction? Last time I checked, England seems to be doing okay. It was all fear mongering because they didn't want to lose them. But I think the EU is just a matter of time before it falls apart, and it should, because that's the globalist nightmare that they want. They want us to be part of the EU. They want one big blob that's not really an individual country, no sovereignty, no democracy, just a bunch of oligarchs that says to all of these countries, you have to do the same thing at the same time, and they get rich and the working class loses everything.
So much there, and I appreciate all of your comments. I had a couple I was going to get back on, but now I thought of something new. Let's look at the issue of public health for a minute, because when I read this globalist literature from Klaus Schwab and others about what their strategy is, if I'm correct, is to develop things that cannot be contained within borders.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is a pandemic. It can't be contained within borders by definition. It's going to travel. It's like fog or water or rain.
Mm-hmm.
You can't control it. And by creating this entire reset of the world economy and latching that on to the current virus issue, whatever you want to call it, it looks to me like they found a very convenient vehicle to avoid sovereignty, to say, yeah, well, sovereignty was great back in the day, but hey, look what we've got here. We've got international issues here. We can't just make a law in China that is going to solve the health crisis in China, because China's health is going to spread to India, and it's going to spread to America, and it's going to spread all over the world. So this is the essence of the argument for a world government. And to use health as the shoehorn to usher in an era in which we do yield our sovereignty to some world authority. This is where the World Economic Forum wants to take us, and it's a totalitarian world order that from George H.W. Bush we learned that their goal is to create a new world order, and that means an authoritarian, top-down world government. So in terms of the issues of sovereignty, I agree that sovereignty is the way to keep peace in the world, the Peace of Westphalia, and the idea that you're responsible for your citizens and I'm responsible for my citizens, and what goes on in my country is my business, and what goes on in your country is your business. But from World War II to now, the United States in particular has found excuses to make what's going on in some other country our business. We need to now the call for the rules-based order, and the idea that our people cannot enjoy freedom if there are tyrants somewhere else in the world depriving their people of freedom. So it becomes our duty to go out and get rid of those tyrants, hypothetically. Of course, what we really do is just impose our own tyrant. But setting that aside, the theory is that we have got now a world that cannot no longer consist of sovereign states. This health problem has become a political problem that interferes with our claims that sovereignty is the right way to go.
I think you're really onto something here, because it's like 2008 when you think about it. 2008 happens and we're like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible problem. People are losing their homes. People are losing everything, right? It's a problem for us But for the globalists and the oligarchs, it's a solution for them. It's a solution for, us having too much power, being able to vote, being able to choose our leaders, being able to do things that they don't want us to do, make decisions. So as a result, they got richer and richer and richer off of it. It was a problem for us. To them, it's the best thing that ever happened. Now let's move forward here. This pandemic, whatever the case may be, this happens, right? What happens? I was reading the other day, like this, I'd have to find it, but there was an article that showed the working class, working poor, and poor people of the world lost X amount of $1 trillion, and the small number of oligarchs got way more. So most of the world loses a lot of money, and this tiny group of oligarchs get rich. Again, something terrible that happens, something unfortunate, something that hurts the masses happens, and it's an opportunity for them. It's a solution for us. It's an opportunity for them to make more money. And if you look at, they're talking about one of the things we've discussed before, the idea about vaccine passports. I had somebody tell me that they were in New York recently, and there was some events going on here and there. And at these events were saying, well, if you haven't had a vaccine, you can't come into this event. I've heard that the NFL may say, that they're saying we're going to have our stadiums full of vaccinated people. So I guess that's going to mean if you can't go to a football, I don't know for sure. We will see. I think that stuff should be illegal, if you ask me, to say you can't go to a football game unless you're vaccinated. Logically, it doesn't even make sense, as we've discussed here, because if you're going to argue that you're protected by the vaccine, you can believe that. It may be true. I mean, I don't know, whatever. I don't know anything about this stuff, but if you're going to argue that you're protected by the vaccine, and I'm not because I didn't take it, well, then why should you be worried if I come in anyway? Because it ain't going to bother you. Apparently, according to your logic, you're the threat to me. I'm not a threat for you. According to their own logic, it doesn't even make sense. But it's like you were saying, this is another opportunity for them to say we can do vaccine passports. We can now say what you can or can't do, where you can or can't go. And let's be honest about this. The people who are less likely to take a vaccine, right, are more likely to be dissidents in the country, are more likely to be less trusting of the government, are more likely to say, I don't trust the government. I don't know what they're doing. I don't trust them to give me medicine to put in my body. Those are the people who are less likely to take the vaccine. So the people that are more compliant, not saying that everybody that takes the vaccine, there are people I know who I've heard have been forced by their jobs to take the vaccine, things like that. So it's an opportunity to get people who are dissidents and less trusting, less compliant with the government now to either force them to get it or to say, well, okay, you're on the outside looking in, you can't do the same thing as everybody. But then again, people are losing their rights. Now you can say things like this. Well, if you got a vaccine, you can go between whatever country with whatever borders. But if you don't, you can't do anything. You can't go anywhere. It's another opportunity for control. And I want to make this point. And it's not just, as I said with 2008, it's not just the pandemic or whatever. It's anytime there's an opportunity, a stock market crash or whatever, they find a way to twist it so they'll have more power. Right now, one of the things that Biden's doing, we've got to make changes, right? I don't know if you're familiar. One of the things that he wants to do is, let me close this. One of the things that he wants to do is a global minimum corporate tax of 15%. Now, one may argue that, okay, well, in some places where they don't pay taxes at all, corporations don't pay taxes at all, okay, maybe that's a good thing. But the bottom line is this: global, every country is different. You are now starting to set a precedent for exactly what you said. I don't have to say it's a one world government, right? I don't have to say that, but what I can simply do is bit by bit start imposing. There's a global, we're all going to do the same kind of tax. We're all going to do the same kind of vaccine passport. We're all going to do this together. We're all going to do that together. So what happens is I don't have to say about one world government or anything. It just slowly but surely starts taking form. So now I say, well, we've all got the same laws on taxes, on this, on traveling, on that, on vaccine passports. We might as well put some kind of a group of countries, a committee together, like an EU kind of thing, so they can just work on those things, right? And now It forms by itself. And now they're saying, this is the term. Well, we've got a rules-based order. And Garland Nixon always says this: where can I find the rules? There's a rules-based order. Show me the rules. You want to talk about rules? I know there's international law. Countries have gotten together and agreed on international law. I'm good with that. There are treaties. Companies have gotten together and signed treaties. There's the laws of the sea and rules of international and freedom of navigation. Sure, I'm good with that. All of those things that countries will agree with. But this rules-based order, they're like, you're violating the rules-based order. And I'm like, is there a website I can click on? Is there a list of the rules? Nowhere. The rules-based order simply means that the United States is in charge of everything, that we are the hegemon in the world, and that we guide our neoliberal globalists. We drag them around to do whatever we want. We tell them what to do. We menace our adversaries, and everybody has to give us what we want. And I might add this. I want people to think about this. I can buy apples that were grown an hour away from my house in Westminster, and they're like $1.99 a pound, right? But if I want to buy bananas that are grown 6,000 miles away, they're 33, 34, 35, 39 cents a pound. Why are the bananas so much cheaper? They're thousands of miles away. You know why they're so much cheaper? Because we've overthrown the governments of those countries with the bananas. Because instead of allowing those countries to have sovereignty and do what they want and be in charge of their own banana production and sales of bananas, we've overthrown those countries. We put puppet dictators in charge of those countries. We screwed over the people of those countries, and we wonder why they're all standing at the border right now. Instead of just allowing them to do whatever they need to make a living, now they're all standing at the border. You've got a lot of Americans looking at them saying, hey, we're mad that these people are at the border. But we keep overthrowing these governments and screwing over these countries. We're paying 39 cents a pound for bananas, but $1.99 a pound for apples that are an hour from my house. It doesn't make sense, but that's what we do. It is, let's dominate these countries. Let's mistreat these countries. That way we can steal their natural resources cheap, but it ain't that cheap. When we overthrow the government of Guatemala, and then we wake up and there's 10,000 Guatemalans standing on the border waiting to come in. And the American people are upset, but they don't know the background that we overthrew the government of Guatemala, screwed the people of Guatemala, and they don't want to leave Guatemala. They'd rather be there. But we overthrow their government, and then we end up with this mess. And Kamala Harris is running around saying to the people, don't come. I got an idea. Stop overthrowing their governments and they won't come. But she won't say anything like that. And nobody will point that out. And if you say that to her and say, this is hypocrisy, you overthrow this country's government, you screw these people over and over, and they're at the border, and we're doing the same thing in Venezuela. What are we going to do when there's 250,000 Venezuelans at the border? Oh, I wonder what they're doing at the border. They shouldn't be there. They should go home. Perhaps we shouldn't be overthrowing their government and screwing over these countries all the time.
Amen.
And somebody said, is this dude French? We keep saying we. Well, I say we. I tell you why. Because I'm an American, and I'm like this. I'm living in America. I have a decent life. I'm benefiting from the high cost of cheap goods. So I may be against it, but I am benefiting from there was a book, I think it was called The High Cost of Cheap Goods. And I'm benefiting from it, have been, but now we as Americans, we're seeing the inflation, now we're starting to suffer from this crazy neoliberal globalist foreign policy. Bit by bit, our prices are going up. Americans are starting to suffer. We're starting to feel the pain. So maybe Americans will finally stop blaming the people at the border, blaming the communists, blaming the Russians, blaming the Iranians, blaming everybody in the world, except blaming the neoliberal oligarchs that run this country. The people who are I say this, my enemies ain't in Russia, they ain't in China, they ain't in Iran, they ain't in Venezuela. My enemies are in Silicon Valley. My enemies are on Wall Street. My enemies are on Capitol Hill. Those are the people that make the decisions. Those are the ones that made the decisions that sent those jobs to China. How about we start looking at the people here we start waking up and blaming the people here and stop trusting these people and getting involved in one party that's masquerading as two parties, and that gets us saying, oh, I'm on the red team. No, I'm on the blue team. The red team's good. No, the blue team's good. And there's one team. There's only one team.
Interesting point about we and who are we. And I agree with you that to use the term we as we are a country, and I'm part of the country, and I benefit from being part of this country, and I have a responsibility to stand up and say, yeah, this is about me. This is my country, and the foreign policy of this country, I own it. I own a part of it. as long as I claim to be a citizen and not a subject. I have to say I am responsible as a citizen to oversee to the government and to make sure that these horrible things don't happen. And here I sit, powerless, watching a completely corrupted administration being pulled this way and that way by interests that we don't see, to create more wars so that they can make more money and traffic more arms and trade them for more addictive drugs that are going to end up in our families, in our kids, in our schools, and to demoralize and defeat the whole purpose of America, which is to prosper. I mean, we're here with, I mean, you remember even, I mean, people like Jefferson would just marvel at the resources of this country. Said that our internal resources are great. You know, he's looking west, you know, at the mountains and thinking, my God, look, think of all the minerals that are in those mountains. Think of all the assets that we have here, right here in this country. And the idea that we have not been able to establish ourselves after 200 and some years as fully sovereign and fully independent is because the old strings of Europe have been inserting, just the tentacles have just come into our banks and our you know, financing the things that benefit the old oligarchs of London and Europe, as well as the people of Wall Street that you mentioned in Silicon Valley, of course. But our dream is still who we are. And so if we do something bad, it doesn't, I'm not going to say, well, they did something bad. I'm not going to say, well, you know, Trump did this or Biden did this, because you're right. We're doing this and we are responsible. And people that would shirk that responsibility and just turn it over to say, oh, well, you know, hey, Trump was bad and we got rid of Trump. So my duty's done, and I'm going to just let the television news tell me what to do for the next 4 years because I did my duty. I voted to get rid of Orange Man, and that kind of thinking leads to this groupthink that people are just. I mean, this is what is really just so frustrating for me as a person who's been out, you know, enjoying so many friends that have, you know, just hardly anything to say to me anymore now that I feel like I have had to express myself to say, guys, wake up. You know, the Democratic Party is full of corruption. And unless you turn around and face that, I mean, it's like you see Trump is the boogeyman in front of them and they're mesmerized by Trump. Oh my God, he's got orange hair and he's going to grab me somewhere where I don't want to be grabbed. And oh my God, but they're not looking behind them because the real devil is the one that's behind them, sitting in the DNC, making deals with people like the Clinton Foundation. My rant for the night. Thank you.
Well, I mean, yeah, and so we are at a situation. Here's the situation in America that people need to wake up to. I think not only does your government, you know, there are a couple of things. One, your government does not represent you in any way, shape, or form as an average. If you're a working person, if you're working poor, if you're poor, any of that, your government don't represent you. The government represents a small group of oligarchs who run our government, who run our Congress, who completely run our government. Number two, I don't think we've had real democracy for a long, long time. Anything anywhere close to it. You know, I don't trust the voting machines. Never did. Especially when it comes to you've got some states where there's voting machines and there's no paper ballot. There's nothing. You vote, the machine tallies the vote, and when someone says, "Well, how can I tell whether or not it was right or not?" Well, we just got to trust them. We just got to trust that they could hack the vote, change it any way they want to, and we just got to trust that they wouldn't do it. To me, you'd have to be a fool to believe that. We've got a country where, let me add this, and I think this is important, because most people Only pay attention to the general election, to who, if there's two senators running, who the two senators are. If there's a president versus another, who they are. A lot of the dirt is done in the primaries, so that in the end, they can give you puppet A or puppet B. So by the time you get, most of the time, by the time you get to the general election, they got a couple of two different versions of some warmongering neoliberal puppet, and you get to choose one of the versions. But either way, you get John. I always say this: no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. In the end, that's all's available for you is John McCain. And so, if my John McCain gets robbed for your John McCain, then I get mad. Hey, you stole my vote for John McCain. But we forgot the only option you had was voting for one of two versions of John McCain. And now you're pissed because your version of John McCain got robbed over. No, they didn't have to, because the only thing was there was two senators, and one of them was John McCain and the other one was John McCain Part 2. And I think that's what Americans don't realize. And let me add this. Okay, there is the actual vote itself. What happens with that? But let's go back a little bit further from that. A democracy works if you have informed voters, right? But what happens when you have deliberately misinformed voters? So when I turn on the TV and they're feeding me nothing but lies about the candidates they don't want. Oh, there's a candidate that, I was a big Tulsi Gabbard fan. I like to call Tulsi Gabbard through 2016. And I liked her because she was a person who said, I want to end the wars. Right. I want to end these wars. Whatever you think of her, she may have been good, bad, or indifferent in hindsight. I don't know. But here's my point. She says, I want to end the wars. Right. The whole machine turned on her. They turned every gun they had on her. And everywhere you went, England, here, overseas, articles everywhere. She's a puppet for the Russians. She's this, she's that. Right. So basically, if the Democratic primaries went through the normal area and everybody was just put out there and you could choose somebody, she might have won, she might not, I don't know. But when you turn on every channel and they're like, Tulsi's a Russian puppet, Tulsi's evil, Tulsi's that, she's a sexist, she's a homophobe, she's this, the usual stuff that they use against everybody, right? They throw that at her day and night. Here's what happens. You don't have an informed public anymore. You have a propagandized public. So regardless of what they do with the votes, the people of America get so propagandized by the news that they are a deliberately misinformed public. You don't have democracy if the oligarchs who own the Washington Post and all the New York Times and all the rest of these stations are just deliberately misinforming people all the time. How do they know the truth about who they're voting for? The best candidates that would look out for them the best, the ones that they may really want, are called Russian puppets, whatever, are attacked, and they're left with two versions of John McCain.
Garland Nixon, thanks so much again for another great hour. It's flown by once again.
Wow.
I think that we make a lot of progress just by talking about these things. Everybody that is in the chat room, anybody that watches the show later and makes a comment, does their part to spread the word about what's going on here. We don't have any weapons except for our freedom of speech, and we have to fight to retain our freedom of speech. As you all know, the neighborhood news studio has been axed once again, and I think this is the 12th or 13th time that they've had to restart their show. This time they are operating under the name of Eek. And George Webb has started a channel as well. I can't remember the name of it right now, but you got to keep up with these guys on Twitter if you want, because tell you, YouTube is striking them right and left, and if they strike me, I'll be back too. Don't worry. Let's see now. Andy's going to fill us in here.
Biden's Belt and Road Show.
There it is. Okay, so y'all, anybody that has asked me, and many people do, where can I find George Webb? Well, the latest is Researchers Roadshow. But on the other hand, if it weren't for YouTube, we wouldn't be able to reach hundreds and hundreds of people every Monday night here. So I have to be grateful for that, and I'm grateful for Garland Nixon and all your great comments. Thank you, buddy. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you. I like Eek Eek. That's a great name.
Yeah, it's Geek something. I don't know. Geek News maybe.